I want to continue talking about free will and how insane it is, and how no one that believes in this imaginary thing called free will can go into the Bible and point to any verse where the will of a man is being discussed as free. Now, the words free and freedom do exist in the Bible. There's libertas, is where we get the word liberty. And there's other words like euletheria in Greek, where the word freedom is, and liberty. Now, so the words existed to describe a man as being free, free to do as he pleases, or free to choose Christ. We choose. It's what they always say. We choose. I choose. There's none of that discussion in the Bible. None of it. And the words exist. I stand therefore in the liberty. Euletheria. Now, the liberty by Christ who has made us free. And that's again, euletheria. And do not engage again with the yoke of bondage. Now that's talking about the law of Moses being circumcised and all that stuff, because you can see it here. Paul, I say to you, I, Paulus, say, if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. So it's talking about circumcision and the law. Set free from the law. That word euletheria means to be set free from like ordinances or rules. That's what it means. It's never used in the sense of the will of a man being set free and then can choose A and B, or choices. But you see the words here. It's being used in terms of set free from the law of Moses. And I testify again, every man who becomes a circumcised, he's a debtor to keep the whole entire law. He's talking about Jews coming in here. And so you got to be circumcised and keep the rituals and all that stuff. Now that includes baptism, dipping in water. Colossians 2:12, 2:14. Nailed the handwriting of rituals to the cross. Yet here we are now with Christians even doing the same thing Paul is saying you're free from. Dipping people in water, crackers and grape juice. And he's saying you're free from that stuff. But not free will. It doesn't exist. Now here would be the opportunity for Paul to say such a thing, but he doesn't. In fact, he goes on to say the opposite when talking about freedom. So he goes on down here to talking about this idea of, trying to keep the law of Moses, coming into the church and saying how it's ridiculous. If I still preach circumcision, why do I suffer persecution? Then the cross ceased to be. And now here's a funny statement. I desired that those who trouble you were cut off. Well, I thought in Romans 9:1 he says he desired to be cut off so that his brethren could go to hell. But he don't say that. Everybody thinks that's what Paul's saying. He's not saying that. That's another topic. Because you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Euletheria. Same word again. Euletheria. Right here. Only not to use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh. And he's going to continue. But through love to serve one another. And this word serve is doulos, a slave. So you've been set free, and the word doulos was back in those other verses too. You've been set free as a slave to the law. Now you're a slave of Christ, and Paul calls him a slave of Christ all the time. So it's still not free will. It's from one kind of slave to another. because all the law is fulfilled in even this, you shall agape your neighbor as yourself. Now, then here's something very interesting, and if you're not reading it in Greek, you won't catch it. So he's exhorting the church here about the law, and you're free from that, not free will, free from law. But if you bite and devour one another, he's talking about fighting over that stuff. Bite and devour one another. Beware that you are not consumed by one another. Don't let it take you over, that disagreement, and cause brothers to be fighting. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Now, he says don't do it, and then he turns around and he says this. And I want to read it in Greek, because if you don't read it in Greek, you won't get the word will in here, the will of a man, because this is about. See, here is a verse about the will of a man, and it's not free. He even just used the word freedom in here 3 or 4 times, and it's not about, and never used it about the will of a man, free to choose Christ or anything like that. Here he's going to use the word will. It's not in English. You have to look in the Greek to see it. So I'm going to read it to you in Greek. For the flesh, sarx, epithumia. That's right here. For the flesh, lust against the spirit. For the flesh, epithumia, kata, down. The pneumatos, the spirit, pneuma. You should know that Greek word if you're listening to my channel. Pneuma is spirit. Epithumia. Now this word epithumia it's word epi, which means to like superimpose. And thumia, or thumos, comes from thumos. That means to like to breathe through your nostrils. Like, I want that, I want that. So it's superimpose, like to breathe heavy over. So the lust of the flesh, the lust, the breathing hard after the flesh, is against the Spirit of God. And the Spirit, pneuma, kata, down, the sarx, the flesh, and the Spirit against the flesh. The breathing hard, lusting after things is against the Spirit. And the Spirit day, you see this day here, that's like it follows. The Spirit, the lusts of the flesh is against the Spirit, and the Spirit is against the flesh. These are opposed. These are opposed. And it follows, for these one another are opposed. Opposed to one another. These are opposed to one another. In order. Here's where, here it goes. In order not that if thelema wills things do. That's kind of funny in Greek. So the flesh is against the Spirit, and the Spirit is against this is death to self. I keep saying it's just everywhere. The Spirit is against the flesh, and the flesh is against the Spirit, in order that what you will, you not do. You don't do those things. That is anti-free will. That's what the Spirit is. That's what the inner man is in the man. For he's against your lust of the flesh, so that you will not to do those things. That is not a free will. That's a slave will, which he just talked about all in the beginning of this verse, about being now not a slave to those other things, but a slave to Christ. And now you have the inner man, the Spirit of God in you, the hope of glory. And the purpose of that is, in order that you don't will, your flesh will. In other words, you don't will of the flesh. Not free. I choose what I want. I choose Christ. I make my decisions. I choose between A and B. I have a libertarian free will to choose this or that. No, you don't. You have a flesh will that lusts against the flesh, against the spirit, I mean. The lust of the flesh, lust against the spirit. That's what here is doctrine of the will of a man, of his flesh. He wills, thelema. It's one of the words in Greek for will, the desire or want. The want of the flesh is against the spirit. There's total depravity right there too. It says the will of the flesh is against the spirit. Any child of God knows this because they live it in their daily life. The free will people, they're not children of God because they don't know this. They don't experience it. They think they're free to do as they want. And that idea that you think you're just free to do what you want is this: the flesh lusting against the spirit. The thing they say is lust against the spirit. Thinking you have a free will is lusting against the spirit, because the spirit is there to quench, to kata down the will of your flesh for a child of God. Now, and if someone that's not a child of God, they just go about their life living their flesh. They just got flesh wills. We have flesh wills, not free wills. And the free will people just go on living in their flesh will against the spirit by saying there's a thing called a free will. They're self-refuting. Free will is not a doctrine found in the Bible. It's a complaint and an attack on the Holy Spirit and on the doctrine of predestination and on the doctrine of the flesh will of a man that is in the Bible. It's right here. It talks about it. The Bible has the words freedom and the word will and the word man and the word choose. They're never put together like the free will morons say. Never, never. It doesn't exist in the Bible. The will of a man is against God. It's against the Spirit. They're opposed. They are opposed. They are opposed to one another. Right there in Greek. They are opposed to one another, contrary to one another. That's the will of a man. That is the will of a man. And the Spirit is there so that in the child of God, the inner man, the Spirit is there to stop that. The will of a man, of his flesh, to stop the opposition over time, slowly to conform to Christ, because that's what the Bible's about. Death to self, conform to Christ.